At 6:45 a.m. on September 30th, 2020, a young woman walked alone toward the Golden Gate Bridge. Fog rolled in from the Pacific, wrapping the steel towers in a ghostly white veil. A jogger saw her pass near Crissy Field. Calm, focused, her hood pulled up against the cold. 15 minutes later, she was gone. No one saw her leave. No one saw her fall. No one saw her again. That morning, the bridge cameras recorded thousands of commuters, but none captured the moment she vanished. Her name was Sydney Kaitlyn West, 19 years old, a bright college student, musician, and athlete, and her disappearance would become one of the most haunting mysteries to ever unfold beneath the San Francisco fog. Sydney grew up in Pleasanton, a quiet suburb east of the Bay, in a close-knit family that cherished music, laughter, and the outdoors. Her father, Jay, remembers her as the kid who could talk to anyone. Her mother, Kimberly, says Sydney had a gift. She could walk into a room and make everyone feel seen. In high school, she played volleyball, loved hiking Mount Diablo, and often spent afternoons recording songs on her guitar. Friends described her as radiant, someone who lit up every group photo. She had that kind of California optimism, the kind that could make you believe everything would work out somehow. But 2020 wasn't a normal year. When the pandemic hit, Sydney, like millions of college students, was sent home from the University of California, Berkeley. Classes went online. Social circles vanished overnight, and the weight of isolation began to settle in. Her parents noticed the change. She smiled less. She spent more time in her room. But she still FaceTimed friends, kept up with her studies, and talked about plans for when this whole thing was over. By late September, Sydney decided to return to the Bay Area. She wanted independence again, the rhythm of the city, the ocean air, something that felt alive. She stayed with a friend in San Francisco near the Marina District, just a few miles from the Golden Gate. On the night of September 29th, she had dinner with her friend. They talked about music, about the stress of remote classes, about how strange it felt to be back in a city that looked familiar but felt empty. At around 10 p.m., she texted her parents, "Love you guys. I'm okay, just going to bed early." It was a simple message, one that at the time meant nothing out of the ordinary. But by sunrise, that text would become the last trace of her voice. The next morning, Wednesday, September 30th, Sydney woke up before dawn. Security footage later confirmed she left the apartment shortly after 6 a.m., wearing black leggings, a teal hoodie, and carrying a small backpack. She ordered a rideshare to Crissy Field, a stretch of waterfront park that opens directly onto the Golden Gate Bridge. Her driver later told police she was quiet, polite, just seemed tired. She asked to be dropped off near the Warming Hut Cafe, a small coffee spot popular with early joggers and photographers. It was a cold morning. The fog was so thick it swallowed the bridge halfway up its towers. Visibility was maybe a few hundred feet. A jogger reported seeing a young woman matching her description walking alone on the pedestrian path, heading east, toward the middle span. He remembered because she paused once, pulled her phone from her pocket, and looked out at the water before continuing on. It was 6:45 a.m. 15 minutes later, the fog thickened. When the same jogger returned along the path, she was gone. That day passed quietly. Her parents texted her around noon. No reply. By evening, they tried calling. Straight to voicemail. That wasn't like Sydney. At first they thought maybe her phone had died, or maybe she was out hiking, somewhere without signal. But as night fell and hours passed with no word, a deep unease began to set in. Her father called her friends. None had seen her. He called the rideshare company. They confirmed she'd been dropped off that morning, but no pickup was ever requested afterward. Then he called the police. The San Francisco Police Department opened a missing person report within hours. Officers began canvassing Crissy Field, the bridge walkway, nearby parking lots. They checked surveillance cameras from the bridge authority. Hours of fog-shrouded footage, blurred by condensation and low light. They could see Sydney walking eastbound on the pedestrian path, but not what happened after. The camera nearest to where she was last seen went white from fog just minutes before she vanished. That tiny coincidence, a momentary loss of visibility, would become the dark heart of this story. By the time word spread through social media that a young woman had gone missing near the Golden Gate Bridge, Sydney's family was already driving north from Southern California. Her father remembers the ride as a blur, the road, the radio silent, the fog thick along the coast. He said, "It felt like the whole bay was swallowing her up." When they arrived, they found her backpack and phone still missing. No pings, no signals, no activity on her bank card. It was as if she'd stepped into the mist and never come back. And for the West family, that morning in September would mark the beginning of a nightmare that, 5 years later, still has no ending. By mid-afternoon that same day, the news had reached nearly everyone who knew Sydney West. Group texts lit up. Phone calls bounced from one coast to another. Her childhood best friend, Megan, said she felt her stomach drop when she heard the words, "No one's heard from her." At first, nobody wanted to panic. Missing calls could mean a dead battery. Maybe she lost her phone. Maybe she was hiking near the Marin Headlands. But by sunset, the unease turned to dread. That night, the fog returned, thicker than ever, and search teams gathered at the north and south ends of the bridge. They used flashlights, drones, and heat-sensing cameras. Coast Guard boats scanned the dark water below, their beams cutting through the mist like ghostly fingers. But there was nothing. No backpack, no jacket, no trace of a 19-year-old girl who had simply vanished. Detective Carlos Ramirez from the San Francisco Police Department led the initial investigation. He later said, "The Golden Gate Bridge is one of the most beautiful places in the world, and one of the hardest to investigate. The constant fog, the strong tides, and the traffic noise make it nearly impossible to retrace every step." They checked surveillance cameras on both ends, from the Presidio side and the Vista Point lookout in Marin County. The last confirmed frame showed Sydney walking alone near the midpoint of the bridge. And then, just fog. No one saw her climb the rail. No vehicle stopped nearby. No one reported screams, splashes, or movement below. It was as if she dissolved into the air. Her parents stood at Crissy Field the next morning, staring up at the bridge, still wrapped in white mist. Kimberly, her mother, whispered to the wind, "If you're out there, baby, we're not giving up." Dozens of volunteers joined the search, joggers, students, local residents who'd seen her photo on social media. Flyers went up across San Francisco, coffee shops, lampposts, bulletin boards. Missing, Sydney Kaitlyn West, last seen near Golden Gate Bridge. Reward $10,000. Her smile looked almost too alive for a missing person poster, bright, hopeful, defiant against the grey backdrop of the bay. As days turned into weeks, leads poured in from across California. A woman in Sausalito thought she'd seen someone matching Sydney's description walking near a grocery store. Another caller claimed a young hitchhiker in Oregon looked like her. Detectives followed up each one, every tip, every rumor, but none checked out. Inside the family's hotel room overlooking the marina, time seemed to lose meaning. Jay West, Sydney's father, would wake at dawn, scroll through emails, make phone calls, check the same footage again and again. Kimberly, exhausted, sat near the window watching the fog roll in and out like a living thing. At night, she'd play one of Sydney's old recordings, her voice singing softly to a guitar. "Someday, I'll find my way back home." The song became both comfort and torture. After 2 weeks, the police announced that they had found no evidence of foul play. They wouldn't speculate on suicide or accident, only that Sydney was last seen on the bridge and the investigation was ongoing. But the family couldn't accept that. She was hopeful, Jay told reporters. She was making plans. She wanted to live. They hired a private investigator, a retired FBI agent named Mark Denning, who'd handled missing person cases before. He retraced every minute of her last morning: the rideshare pickup, the driver's testimony, cell tower data, traffic cams from nearby parking lots. Nothing pointed to abduction. Nothing suggested she'd planned to run away. Denning's conclusion was chilling. We're looking at an absence, not a trail. On October 12th, less than 2 weeks after her disappearance, the Coast Guard officially suspended the search. The reason was simple: no new evidence, no body, no debris. But for her family, the case wasn't closed. It had just begun. They launched the Find Sydney West Foundation, raising funds for awareness campaigns and mental health programs for young people in crisis. They held candlelight vigils near the bridge every few months. Rows of flickering lights along the waterfront, faces hidden behind masks because of the pandemic. The image became unforgettable: a line of small flames cutting through fog, refusing to go out. Reporters asked Sydney's father if he believed his daughter might still be alive. He paused for a long time before answering. "I believe in her spirit," he said quietly, "and I believe someone out there knows something, even if it's small." To this day, that belief keeps the search alive, a promise echoing through the endless fog that swallowed her. In every missing person case, theories rise like smoke, some born from logic, others from fear. For Sydney West, the fog around her disappearance became both literal and symbolic. No crime scene, no evidence, no goodbye note, just a girl. And the bridge. The first theory came quietly, whispered among investigators who'd seen too many similar reports. Suicide. The Golden Gate Bridge, for all its beauty, carries a dark legacy. For decades, it has been one of the most frequent sites of self-harm in the United States. And when Sydney's mental health struggles surfaced in interviews, some detectives feared the worst. Her parents didn't deny she'd battled depression. She had spoken to a therapist, taken medication, and even paused college briefly to focus on recovery. But they refused to believe she would take her own life. She was talking about her music, Kimberly said. She wanted to record a new EP, move back to Berkeley full-time, visit her grandparents. She was making plans, not ending them. The family urged police not to treat the case as a suicide without proof. But proof, in this story, was exactly what no one could find. The currents beneath the bridge are unforgiving. Cold, fast, and deep. Bodies rarely resurface intact. Even sonar sweeps yielded nothing. The second theory: accident. What if she had leaned over the rail to take a photo, something countless tourists do every day, and slipped? It sounded plausible until detectives studied her position on the walkway. The railing there stands shoulder high. To fall accidentally would require an improbable series of moves. No dropped phone, no shoe, no bag. And Sydney was known for being cautious, especially near heights. Then came the third, darker theory: abduction. A few online sleuths pointed to unsolved kidnappings near San Francisco: joggers, hikers, transient workers who vanished without a trace. Could someone have followed her onto the bridge in the fog? Her last known photo showed no one near her, but fog can hide almost anything. Private investigator Mark Denning reviewed hundreds of traffic camera stills. At 6:48 a.m., just minutes after Sydney was last seen, a white van stopped briefly on the Marin side before merging back into traffic. Its plates were unreadable in the mist. Denning flagged it to police, but the van was never found. To skeptics, that moment meant nothing. To the family, it was the first sliver of possibility, that maybe she hadn't chosen to disappear. Maybe she was taken. But evidence never followed. No ransom, no digital footprints, no use of her bank card or ID. Sydney's online life froze completely at the hour she vanished. Even her music files, cloud accounts, and email drafts remained untouched. Journalist Emma Hughes, who covered the case for a Bay Area paper, wrote, "It's like time stopped at 6:45 a.m. Every trace of Sydney West exists before that minute, and nothing after." That line became the headline that defined the mystery. Some in the community began to look beyond human explanations. Posts on Reddit and Facebook speculated about the bridge curse, thin place energy, and the fog that takes. For a story with no answers, superstition filled the silence, yet the family stayed grounded. They didn't believe in curses, only persistence. Jay West told a vigil crowd, "She's not a ghost story, she's our daughter, and until someone proves otherwise, she's still out there." Still, even for the most rational minds, the emptiness around her disappearance felt supernatural. 100 feet of walkway, 1,000 tons of steel, endless cameras, and no trace of where she went. How does someone vanish in one of the most surveilled spots in America without leaving a single clue? Every theory held water, and everyone leaked. The days after Sydney vanished stretched into weeks, and then into something much heavier. Time didn't move forward for her family. It folded in on itself. Every sunrise over the Golden Gate looked the same, grey, distant, unreachable. Her parents rented a small apartment near Crissy Field just to stay close to the last place she was seen. Every morning, her father walked along the same path she took, tracing her final steps, looking for something everyone else might have missed. He said the hardest part wasn't the silence, it was the normalcy. People still jogged, biked, took selfies with the bridge. Life went on, right where his daughter had disappeared. The community refused to let her story fade. Posters with Sydney's smile appeared in grocery stores, gas stations, bus shelters from San Francisco to Sacramento. Volunteers organized search parties every weekend, scanning trails and beaches that stretched for miles. Some carried candles, others carried hope. At one vigil near the bridge overlook, hundreds gathered in the fog, with photos of Sydney taped to white balloons. When the wind picked up, the balloons rose slowly and vanished into the mist, disappearing the same way she had. Reporters described it as hauntingly quiet. No one spoke for a full minute. All you could hear was the wind hitting the cables above and the sound of waves below, crashing into the unseen. Sydney's music began to circulate online after that. Friends released her demo tracks, soft, indie folk melodies layered with a voice both fragile and luminous. Lyrics that once sounded hopeful now carried the weight of prophecy. "I'll find my way through the fog someday, even if no one sees me." The song went viral briefly, played on radio tributes and podcasts about missing persons. For her parents, hearing her voice through speakers felt like having her back for 3 minutes at a time. Then the song would end, and reality would return. Meanwhile, the Golden Gate Bridge, long celebrated as a symbol of freedom and engineering triumph, took on a darker tone. Locals began calling it the line. Not between cities, but between presence and absence, between what's known and what's left behind. Tourists still came, but some said they felt something different now, a heaviness in the air. Even the workers who maintained the bridge said the case changed how they looked at their job. One of them, a maintenance technician named Luis Ortega, told a reporter, "Every morning when I tighten those bolts, I wonder if she touched the same railing. It's like she's part of the bridge now." The case also ignited a wider conversation about mental health and the lack of preventive measures on the bridge. For years, activists had pushed for a safety net installation, a physical barrier designed to stop suicides. Construction had started in 2018 but was delayed repeatedly. After Sydney's disappearance, petitions resurfaced. People asked why it always takes another tragedy to make the system care. Kimberly West joined those campaigns, not because she accepted that her daughter had jumped, but because she didn't want any other family to live in that same uncertainty. "Hope," she said, "is both a blessing and a punishment. You can't stop believing, even when it hurts." 5 years later, on each anniversary, a group gathers near the bridge at dawn. They play Sydney's songs through a small speaker and release a single teal balloon, the colour of her favourite hoodie. It floats upward, gets swallowed by the fog, and disappears into the light. For a few seconds, everyone there looks up, searching. Then, as always, the mist closes and takes her away again. 5 years have passed since the morning Sydney West walked into the fog, and still, no one knows what truly happened. Her case remains open under the San Francisco Police Department's Missing Persons Division. Detective Ramirez, the same officer who led the first search, still keeps her file on his desk. He says he looks at her photo every few weeks, not out of obligation, but because it reminds him of unfinished business. Some cases go cold, he said, but this one never leaves the room. Every few months, a new tip surfaces. A social media post, a blurry photo from a tourist, a claim from someone who thinks they saw her in Oregon, Seattle, or even Canada. Each lead is investigated, and each one, so far, has led nowhere. The Find Sydney West Foundation continues to fund private searches and mental health outreach programs for young adults. They've partnered with schools and local organizations, teaching students how to recognize early signs of depression, how to talk, how to listen. Sydney's name has become a symbol of awareness, not just of loss, but of prevention. Her parents still hold press conferences every September. They speak softly, never angry, never resigned, just steady. Her father always ends with the same sentence: "If you know something, say something. Even the smallest detail might bring our daughter home." Today, if you walk along Crissy Field at dawn, you'll still see the missing posters, weathered, sun-faded, edges curling from the wind. They've become part of the landscape, almost like memorials carved by time. Locals stop sometimes just to touch the paper, whispering prayers to no one in particular. And when the fog rolls in again, thick, silent, swallowing the bridge, it feels like the story is starting over. Another morning, another unanswered question drifting above the cold Pacific. Sydney West remains missing, but for those who remember her, the search never really stopped. There are stories that end, and there are stories that never find an ending, only echoes. Sydney's disappearance became one of those, a wound that never healed, only learned to breathe. For her family, every year feels both closer to the truth and farther from peace. Sometimes, people passing through the Golden Gate say they feel something strange there, a presence, a chill, a quiet reminder of those who never made it home. Whether that's imagination or memory, no one knows. But when the morning fog drifts in from the Pacific and the city goes still, it's hard not to think of the girl in the teal hoodie, walking alone into the mist. Her mother once said, "If I could send her one message, I'd tell her, 'You're not forgotten, not for a single day.'" Maybe that's what this story really is. Not about disappearance, but remembrance. Because as long as someone is still searching, still speaking her name, she's not entirely gone. If this story moved you, if you believe every missing person deserves to be found, please like this video and subscribe to Silent Traces. Here, we keep their voices alive, one story at a time.